Sienna God, hello all. Good afternoon, Wado. Thank you for watching. So this is part B of reading Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell, and I went over. So I kind of cut off there. So let me read the last sentence. The answer was usually a call for more welfare state programs, more quote-unquote pride and more quote-unquote self-esteem, more steeping in the history of Black achievement or white injustice. The actual track record of this approach compared to the opposite approach in the New England enclaves received virtually no attention. Fortunately, in the decades before the mindset became fixed, most Blacks had become better educated and had lifted themselves out of poverty at a rate higher than that after the Civil Rights Revolution of the 1960s. For example, more Blacks rose into professional and other higher level occupations in the years preceding the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than in the years following its enactment. This factual history served no one's political agenda and has since been replaced by a fictional history that does. The economic advancement of Blacks has been widely portrayed as due to the civil rights movement and the political leaders, Black and white, who have proclaimed themselves champions of Black Americans, since no one has as large a vested interest in opposing this view as its proponents have in perpetuating it. The politically more convenient view has prevailed, along with attributing the continuing economic and social gaps between Blacks and whites to the sins and shortcomings of the latter. Nothing is easier to find than sins and shortcomings among human beings, regardless of their race. The question is, how much of a casual factor these moral failings have been in history, and to what extent have they been effects rather than causes? For example, the decline in whites' hostility and discrimination toward Blacks in northern cities during the 19th century, followed by a resurgence of hostility at the turn of the century, were not just inexplicable swings of the pendulum in white public opinion. Hold on. For example, the decline in whites' hostility and discrimination toward Blacks in northern cities. Oh, yeah. Okay. We're not just inexplicable swings of the pendulum in white public opinion. The masses of Blacks arriving in the North at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century were denounced in the Black papers at the time for their crudeness, violence, and crime. It was not just a question of quote-unquote perceptions or quote-unquote stereotypes among whites, though undoubtedly some whites reacted in ways wholly unjustified by the situation as elements of other racial groups do. Contemporary preoccupation with the evils of quote-unquote society distorts the history of many groups, passing over internal improvements that took decades or generations of effort because those improvements, whether modest or dramatic, imply that there was something that needed to be improved within these groups, that not all their problems were due to the quote-unquote perceptions or quote-unquote stereotypes of others. Clinging to a counterproductive culture in the name of group pride and avoiding changes because they could be labeled quote-unquote self-hate are patterns that have no track record that would justify optimism. The evidence is all on the other side, but that matters only to those who value evidence over ideology, history over visions. Cosmic justice and injustice. Few things are more common or more painful than sharp contrast between the prosperity of some racial or ethnic groups and the poverty of others in the same society. At one time, such things were accepted as either divinely ordained or as being a consequence of innate racial characteristics. However, as both these explanations were discarded over time, a new notion arose that these economic contrasts were consequences of injustices visited upon minorities by minorities. Yet that explanation is not without its own serious problems, as great as the problems of earlier explanations that did not stand the test of time. One of the strongest arguments against the injustice explanation of intergroup differences is that in many countries around the world, minorities with virtually no political power or other means of discriminating against the majority population have nevertheless been far more successful, economically, educationally, or otherwise, than those who constitute the bulk of the nation's people. This has long been true of the Chinese in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, Germans in Russia and Brazil, Jews in Eastern Europe and the United States, Lebanese in West Africa, Scots in North Africa and Australia, and the Japanese in Brazil, Canada, the United States, and Peru. Clearly, in these and other cases, the minority has simply outperformed the majority population, often in both the educational system and the economic system. Even when it is clear that some groups have excelled without any power to suppress or oppress other groups, there is often still a rankling, rankling, sense of the injustice of it all. that a child born into one group has so much greater prospects of success in life than a child of no greater innate ability born into another group. Sometimes this is blamed on a lack of quote-unquote social justice, though the causes of such differences extend well beyond things controlled by any society, and which could therefore legitimately be called quote-unquote social. Each group trails the long shadow of its own history and culture, which influence its habits, priorities, and social patterns, which in turn affect its fate. If there is an injustice, it is an injustice which extends beyond the control of an existing government, institution, or society, because it involves the confluences of history, demography, geography, and other factors, including luck. If there is an injustice, it is the cosmic level. It is at this cosmic level and the vagaries of fate, vagaries of fate. Lamenting the vagaries of fate may leave us with a galling, Galling, sense of helpless frustration, which may escape by transforming the tragedy of human condition into specific sins of specific societies. This turns an insoluble problem of cosmic justice into an apparently more manageable issue of social justice. Since the sins of human beings are virtually inexhaustible, there is seldom a lack of examples of wrongdoing to which intergroup differences can be attributed rightly or wrongly. Where the quest for injustice is overriding among the things, it overrides our logic and evidence. Right. Where the quest for injustice is overriding among the things, it overrides our logic and evidence. Heck yeah. But man, I'm gonna tell you, that's hard. Okay. Ooh. Okay. I feel like I just need to lay down. I just put my foot on the floor. Anyway, yeah. It's not spinning. It's just like whoa. For example, various kinds of differences between white and Aboriginal Australians were lumped together by a white Australian woman as examples of social injustice. The fact that I wake up each morning in a warm, safe, comfortable home, secure in the knowledge that the schools I send my children off to are organized to enhance their life chances and choices, and that good health, employment opportunities, and respect are the norm, not the goal in our lives. What? Hang on. I may have to end this early because my brain is like, wait a minute. But we're kind of swimming a little bit. Hold on. All right. The fact that I wake up each morning in a warm, safe, comfortable home, secure in the knowledge that the schools I send my children off to are organized there we go, to enhance their life chances and choices, and that good health, employment opportunities, and respect are the norm, not the goal in our lives, has been made possible through the 208-year exploitation of land that belonged to Indigenous Australians since the beginning of time. Here, differences in life chances are attributed to the seizure of land by the transplanted Europeans who settled in Australia. If this were meant seriously as an empirical proposition rather than as an ideological indictment, then the most obvious question would be, were there no differences in life chances between the Europeans and the Aborigines before they met? When they were each living in their own respective homelands, are differences today greater than they were then? None of this provides a moral justification for the invasion of Australia, but it raises a question about the casual claim that differences in life chances today are due to expropriations of land in the past or exploitation of the Indigenous people then or now. Had no invasion of Australia ever occurred, and this white Australian woman had been born in the land of her ancestors, probably England, would she not have awakened each morning to better circumstances and prospects than Aborigines in a distant and undisturbed Australia? I don't know. Nor would she have been any more deserving of this windfall gain in England than in Australia. I reckon what part of England would she have been born in? And then maybe you could then compare to how it was in Australia before it got invaded or whatever. Yet her sense of guilt for her personal advantages and her ancestors' sins is greater Sorry, I had to pre-read that text message real quick. Our daughter was caught in a bunch of traffic because of the storm. But anyhow, let's see. Yet her sense of guilt for her personal advantages and her ancestors' sins is greater because she lives in Australia. Oh, yeah. More important, it leads her to a conclusion all too characteristic of the quest for cosmic justice. The Aborigines should not have to change in order to achieve equality of results with whites in Australia. Clearly, the Aborigines would have had to change in order to achieve equality of economic results with Englishmen, had both remained alone in their respective homelands. Yet those with a vision of cosmic justice want both groups to have the same effects without having the same causes, when both are living in the same country. Such reasoning is by no means peculiar to Australia, much less to this particular Australian. Very much the same kind of reasoning, or lack of reasoning, has been used by a well-known American professor of history. I was born into a middle-class family of WASP, W-A-S-P, in all caps, ancestry. My parents prized education and sent all of their children to college. The cultural environment that encouraged white males to hope for careers at the top of the professional and business pyramid, but discouraged, inhibited, or prohibited women and minorities from doing the same, was a more powerful form of affirmative action than anything we have more recently experienced in the other direction. He and others like him were also, quote unquote, in quotes, beneficiaries of a sort of demographic affirmative action, end quote, since they were, in quotes, born during the trough, T-R-O-U-G-H, of the Depression era birth rate, end quote, so that they entered the job market just as, end quotes, the baby boom expansion in college enrollments, end quote, created a great demand for professors from the smaller preceding generation. What this professor chooses to call, end quotes, demographic affirmative action, end quote, is an injustice only in some cosmic sense, rather than an injustice growing out of some chosen policy. Like affirmative action, since all things are the same except for the differences, and different except for the similarities, strained analogies like this may pass muster among those who are determined to ignore all differences internal to different groups of people. Despite vast differences in income and wealth between European and Africans in their respective homelands, much smaller differences between the descendants of Europeans and the descendants of Africans in the United States are widely attributed to the sins of the former against the latter. Had both groups migrated voluntarily to America and both been treated fairly, there would still have been no reason whatever to expect their economic levels. It really says whatever. I wasn't saying whatever. Anyway. Like, I'm tired of tripping over myself, whatever that word is, right? No, it says, would still have been no reason whatever to expect their economic levels to be the same, especially since people who did migrate voluntarily from different parts of Europe had income and wealth differences that were at one time greater than those between black and white Americans today. None of this denies that there were, in fact, sins committed by whites against blacks and in the United States, or by the British against the Aborigines in Australia. I was making sure I didn't skip a sentence. Those sins are not in dispute. The point here is that statistical disparities are not evidence of either the existence or the magnitude of those sins, for which there is ample other evidence. Such disparities are all too common around the world, with and without discrimination, with and without invasion, with and without slavery. This does not mean that these disparities are all due to individual merit. Inherited cultural advantages and disadvantages are windfall gains and windfall losses. More fundamentally, merit is a moral category. Confusing morality with causation is a fatal weakness in trying to understand history. Huge unmerited and unintentional differences in life chances have been common among among Europeans in Europe. I mean, it's humans in Europe, isn't it? As an insightful scholar has aptly pointed out, in quotes, a European child will have a very different life depending on whether that baby was born east or west of a line that starts at the Baltic and stretches southward along Poland's eastern border, down Slovakia's western border, and along the middle of Hungary, then continues down through the middle of Bosnia to the Adriatic Sea. And that's what I was saying when the person was wondering if she would have had a different life or whatever had she been born in Europe, right? And they didn't actually invade the Aborigines at all, right? Didn't invade Australia at all. It just depends on where she's born in England, like I said. Excuse me. There are historic, geographic, social, and other reasons for the large economic and other disparities between the life chances of people living in Eastern and Western Europe. These differences existed at least as far back as the Roman Empire, as late as 2003. Oh, dang. The average per capita income in most Eastern European countries was less than half of that of the Western European countries. That's crazy. Neither in Europe nor elsewhere do all innumerable influences on people's fate balance out to produce the equality of the outcome that is taken at a baseline from which to measure social injustices that are used to explain inequalities of results. Nor have the various causal factors involved implied any such moral notion as quote-unquote blaming the victim. Or I should say, in quotes, blaming the victim, in quotes. Morality is not causation, and confusing the two does not advance either understanding or social improvement. In a sense, it is healthy that more prosperous individuals or societies recognize that their prosperity is not all due to what they themselves have done in their own lifetimes, but is in fact the fruit of the efforts of contributions made by many other people before they were born. However, gratitude for whatever has made their prosperity possible has for many been replaced by guilt for having been more fortunate than others. Thus, their forebears are seen not as having bequeathed a valuable heritage, but as having perpetuated great injustices. That has got to be so very difficult for people to have like money, and when they trace where the money came back from, it's like, it started when our family invaded somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, took over an entire civilization, forced everything upon somebody else, and the West in history. Some who assume the posture of citizens of the world view the survival of their own particular society as a matter of no great moment, viewing it as simply a matter of choosing among alternative political and social arrangements. But history shows that more than transformation is involved. A society or a civilization may be destroyed and its successor improvised from the ruins, not just the physical ruins, but from anarchy as the ruins of law and order, and ignorance as the ruins of systems of education and the other instruments of cultural transmission. After the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, it was centuries. Some estimate a millennium before the standard of living in Western Europe rose again to the level it had reached in Roman times. The survival of a society or a civilization is not just a question of a preference for one particular set of political or social arrangements over another. It is easy to discuss alternative arrangements around a seminar table. Oh yeah, as if transformations were no problem, but the painful alternatives amid the ruins can be very different. Europeans lived for centuries with the presence of ruins more magnificent than anything they were capable of creating or even restoring. It is hardly surprising that they looked back at the ancients with awe, long before they developed the modern Western tendency to look forward to greater accomplishments in the future than those of the past or the present. Another modern Western tendency, at least among intelligentsia, is to be anti-Western. Oh yeah. To apply double standards that ignore or excuse behavior in non-Western societies. That would be, what? excoriated. Excoriated in the West, or to picture the sins of the human race as if they were peculiarities of quote-unquote our society. Specific examples include the history of conquest, slavery, and war. Oh, let me go ahead and end it before I go over. Then to go hang, we meet again. Love you, mean it.